225 South Michigan Avenue, is a gentleman known as the Godfather of Third Stream, Gunther Schuller. Also here, trumpeter, composer, and leader of the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, as well as a host of a jazz program here on WDCB, Orbert Davis. Also with us, saxophonist, composer Daniel Schnyder, and CJP pianist Leandro Lopez Verde. They're here to talk about this music and play a little bit too. We bring you this broadcast in cooperation with the PianoForte Foundation, which is dedicated to promoting the art of piano in Chicago. The work of the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Aaron Copland Fund for Music, and New Music USA. And one of the reasons why we're here is to tell you about not only third stream music, but that there is a great concert coming up at 7:30 p.m., Symphony Center, this Friday night, 220 South Michigan Avenue. It's going to be an adventurous evening of music by Chicago's Jazz Philharmonic, honoring NEA Jazz Master and composer Gunther Schuller, and featuring the world premiere of a new work by composer, saxophonist Daniel Schnyder. And further info, chicagojazzphilharmonic.org. Well, good evening, gentlemen. It's great to have you here. What an honor and a pleasure. Gunther Schuller, Daniel Schnyder, Mr. Orbert Davis. Wonderful to have you all here. And you know, we've got all sorts of questions. We're going to hear some great music, but I want to start in 1957, if we can.
57?
Yeah, I was 2 then.
I'm 89 now.
Oh, no.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
You don't look
because
a day
when
over
I was
60.
young, most people died in their 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the target is 80s and 90s, you know. Mm-hmm. And Elliott Carter, our great composer, died at age 103.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so 57.
In 1957, you came up with a term for some music that existed and has existed since then. And well, I wanted to know, third stream music. It's a nice way to describe the music, but why not Gunther Schuller's music? Why not Gil Evans's music? What are the principles behind the idea of third stream music?
Well, it can be Gunther Schuller, it can be Gil Evans, it can be 100 people. No, I created that. I was, look, let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
When I grew up and I got fascinated with jazz, it all started one evening when at the Hurricane Club on I heard a broadcast of Duke Ellington, and it changed my life. I could go into a whole half hour about that experience. But anyway, and I said to my father next day, you know, Pop, I heard some music last night. That's just as great as Beethoven. He nearly had a heart attack. He was a great violinist and pianist and flutist and in the New York Philharmonic, but jazz was, you know, he didn't understand it. So I said, and I began to realize that there were these, for me, listening to the radio a lot, I realized that there were two, most of you won't know this, I think, that there were actually, I'm talking about the late 30s, 40s, and further on, there were 2 great musics simultaneously in this country. Now we have, 23 different musics, you know. And what was so wonderful about them, they were both equally popular. In other words, and by that I mean, of Americans, 50% of Americans listen to classical music. And guess what? Another 50% listen to jazz. Mm-hmm. But this gets into racism. They didn't talk to each other. Mm-hmm. They both vilified each other. And I said, my God, Duke Ellington, as great as Beethoven or Bach or you know, Gil Evans or whoever, Miles Davis, whoever you want to mention. For me, as a young fledgling composer, to me, it was clear that even though the style, the sounds were different, the instrumentations were different, the creativity of the jazz music was in any technical, creative sense exactly on the same level by the greatest of them, you know. I mean, there was also a lot of mediocre jazz around.
Sure.
And so I said, we got to bring these two musics together, especially since jazz is the one music that was born on our soil in America. And you know, all this, you know, not relating to each other. And I also added to that, you know, jazz can learn some things from classical music, and classical music can learn some things from jazz. Well, that was all heretic, you know, and of course I was, I just, but anyway, so I said, there's a mainstream, you know, the critics like Nat Handoff and all those writers on jazz, they had invented this mainstream idea, you know, jazz mainstream. So I just took that up. I said, okay, there's one mainstream, and there's another mainstream, and as says in the Bible, they begat a child, and there's the third stream. It's that simple. And then, of course, since I was preaching this sermon, I was vilified on both sides, you know, and that took about 10 years to settle down.
And they vilified you even after listening to Art Tatum or many of the other John
Well,
Kirby
just
and
jazz
all
in
those
general.
great people.
I mean,
just
you
jazz
know,
in general.
Just the idea that these musics should somehow come together was, well, it's pure racism. I mean, you know, so that's what it was. And it was totally stupid. And people who said that, I thought should have known better that in the hands of the greatest jazz composers and improvisers, improvising is of course a form of composing, at the highest level, it's just as great as the highest level in the other things. They just write it down in classical music.
There you go. All right.
So, and then all of that settled down, and of course, it's no longer a contentious argument, and we have had 60 years of third stream music. Some of it very good, some of it not so good, some of it pretty terrible, because the idea is not just to stick a few bars of Mendelssohn into some swinging jazz. I mean, it's got to be creative in both styles and fully knowledgeable of what constitutes the great levels in each of those forms of music. Because otherwise you have what we call a pastiche. You know, you just stick a couple of things together. You know. And there's been a lot of bad third stream, too.
Well, there's been a lot of bad art in all areas, we can say that.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So anyway, that's
Gunther Schuller. You're listening to DCB Jazz, and the other guest that the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic has is Mr. Daniel Schnyder. Daniel, welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
And I understand you've written, you're a prolific writer and a man who has, what did I count, at least 4, if not 5 composer in residences under your belt at one time. And for you to find the time to write a new piece for the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is wonderful. And how did you and Orbert, and why don't you guys talk about how you met, and Orbert, how you got Daniel to participate with
Well,
the
actually, we first met,
organization?
we have a mutual friend, a trumpet player who spent time in Chicago, Mike Mossman.
Yeah,
We were good friends for a long time when he was here, so I watched his career when he moved to New York and kind of stayed in touch with him and came across your name and your writing by following Mike, Daniel's name. And then, of course, by then I was already composing third stream and a fan of third stream. So when it came time to pick a composer to create a commission work, there was no other name but Daniel Schnyder.
That's very nice of you, Orbert.
Oh, no, it's true. And it's even more obvious now that we've had a couple rehearsals on your piece, and yeah, it's pretty phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah, I will hear it for the first time, so.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, this was always, I mean, I know
Does he need a
Gunther's.
mic?
No, I have a mic
Oh,
here.
I'm
Yes.
sorry.
I know Gunther's work for a long time, and also I was fascinated early on with also people like Eddie Sauter and the thing that he did with Stan Getz,
yeah.
Focus.
Right.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it was just something that I wanted to do because I was not born and raised in the United States. I was born in Switzerland, and I heard all this music, and I saw a huge potential of developing something new, where I can also bring in my tradition. You know, I cannot pretend that I'm John Coltrane, and I'm not. You know, I realized that I love that music and I play that music, but I have to bring in something that comes from my roots and from my background. And I just love to do that. And yeah, that developed in my skills. I'm also writing symphonies, I'm writing operas, I'm writing concerti for violin concerto, cello concerto, everything, piano concerto, which is sometimes it's jazzy, or sometimes it's not. Sometimes it also has
Same
other
with me.
roots. It has roots like it's sometimes even ethnic music, like Arab music or Chinese music or African music. But for me, this whole thing belongs together. I mean, as music is music, and what you have to do is you have to distill it and create something new that where your personality is recognizable, where you actually can express yourself and your emotions, and that will translate to all audiences all over the world. I realized that. So, for instance, next week I go to Bethlehem to play my Abraham opera. Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and I'm sure that these are completely different people from our audiences, but that will also translate. Since if you incorporate our music in a more holistic way, that's also what Third Stream is about. We will address the people.
Do you find you get a different reaction outside of the United States to your music? Because the music here and the people here, it's really a melting pot of many different cultures. That's what jazz has become and always has been.
Yeah.
Whereas the melting pot idea outside of the United States is fairly unique, really.
Well, there is a problem. As already Gunther said, there is some sort of racism also, that as soon as you write play this with a swing feel, you get 10 times less money. The royalty company in Germany just puts you down, and you get like 1/10 of a serious, so-called serious composition, because they label it as Unterhaltungsmusik. Entertainment music, you know, Unterhaltungsmusik. And this is still there, and also academia, Gunther knows much more about that than me, is very protective. You know, there are a lot of people that don't want this thing to happen because they think, okay, this is my garden, I have to protect it, and if there are other influences, maybe some of my privileges will be gone in the future. So there's still a lot of infighting, but music is stronger than that. You know, it prevails. Finally, it prevails.
Can I ask him a question?
Well,
I think we have time.
No,
Go ahead.
because he's born in Switzerland, and it just occurred to me, one of the great Third Stream pieces I had the honor to premiere with the Tonhalle Orchestra and a jazz orchestra. Do you know about that piece?
From,
I can't think of the composer.
Armin Schibler.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that was my teacher.
Yes, yeah. That was a great piece, and still is, but it hasn't been performed very much. I thought
No.
you would know. What year might that have been?
1977.
Yeah. That's a terrific one. So well,
I'm,
anyway,
I'm writing that down so we can perform that with the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic.
well, speaking of performing, Gunther, you were involved in a wonderful session with Miles Davis and Gil Evans in Chicago and Lee Konitz, and one of my favorites, Jerry Mulligan and others. And it's become the birth of the Cool Sessions.
Yes.
And there was a song in there called Moon Dreams. They actually, did Glenn Miller record that before you guys did, or did that become part of the Miller? It must have, because he had passed away already.
I can't remember. So many things that
That's
I once knew I've forgotten. but I can't quite answer that. But of course, McGregor was his pianist, so he must have played it sometime.
Chubby
And in fact,
McGregor,
my
right?
son found a recording of it. That's true. Yeah. Well, anyway, you wanted to ask more.
Well, yeah, Moon Dreams. I was on the internet and I saw you talking to Joe Lovano about that, and there's a wonderful story that goes with that towards the end of the piece, and how you would
Yeah.
ask the producers to record it at a certain time, and
Yeah,
they made you record it at a different time.
You want me to
Well,
tell
yeah,
that
you
whole
finish
story?
the story.
Sure, of course. Well, that was in 1950, and that was the third of the sessions with the Miles Davis. It was called Miles Davis Nonet at first. And I was only, they had a wonderful horn player, can't think of his name right now, but he moved to Los Angeles. And so when that happened, Miles asked John Lewis, we were all close friends and everything, he said, gee, who are we going to get? We got to get a horn. Yeah, there's only one Gunther Schuller. So I ended up in that third session. So about Moon Dreams, what Gil did, he transformed that rather simple piece in D major into a bitonal masterpiece, and at the end it actually goes virtually atonal, and with rhythms like quintuplets and things like that that had hardly, if ever, been written by that time. I have a little footnote to that. When I was working with so many times with the trumpet player who's in a wheelchair now the last 5 years.
Clark?
Yeah, yeah. I hired him for many gigs and things like that, and I wrote some quintuplets, and he looked, and he said, what the hell is this? He used another word. He said, what is this? I said, well, it's called a quintuplet. It's what? What? Well, I can't play that. And I said, look, I wrote that for you because I've heard you play quintuplets at least 100 times without knowing it. And then I sang it for him. Oh, that's what it is. So anyway, that was just one of so many little things that Gil put in there that had never really been done to that extent, even by Ellington. I mean, just to say that Ellington's style is just totally different, you know. But so what happened when we got to that session? It had been rehearsed many times. We could never get through the piece altogether. By in the what I call the coda, after the song is over, Gil added this coda, which settles down into a B minor chord. And we could never get through it. They had rehearsed it even before I was in the band. They could never get through it. The swinging parts, the more ordinary, of course they could. So anyway, when it came to that session, I said to Miles, look, we've never been able to get through this piece really well. We've gotten close, but we can't put a just close recording out. We got to put out a perfect recording, or nearly perfect. I said, so tell the engineer, excuse me, to not leave Moon Dreams for the end of the session, because we ain't going to make it if that happens. Well, he went to that the producer or whatever, whoever, I forget his name, and guess what? He completely ignored that, and did one of the ballads that the singer. See how many names I forget? Who was that? Somebody knows. Which he had two songs in that session, and they went beautifully, but the producer insisted on doing them 3 times each, which wasted a lot of money. I looked at Miles. I said, what you know, what's going on? So finally, of course, it ended up being last, and I think it was something like 10 minutes. So we tried it, we fell apart. We tried it again, it went a little better. And now we were down to 5 minutes, and there was supposed to be another break or something. And I said, I went to Miles, listen, we're not going to make it unless, let me conduct that ending. And, oh, yeah, well, sure, of course. And frankly, I don't mean to brag, but I was the only actual conductor in the field of jazz, at that time. I mean, real conductor. There were time beaters. Gil was a time beater. But anyway, I mean, he's one of my heroes, so I say that with all respect. But anyway, so I said, but look, the thing is this is going to be tricky for me, because when you play the horn, you have to put your hand into the bell. If you don't do that, everything comes out sharp. So here I am conducting without my hand in the bell, and of course fingering here. And so I had to lip down all of my notes without, being able to manipulate this. And that's how we finally did get through it. It's far from perfect, but even the ending sort of, I don't know how many of you know it well, but it's after the D major part of the song, McGregor's song, we get, I think it's 1.5 choruses or something like that. And then comes this Koser, which starts with a Schoenbergian chord, blah, and then it just gradually gets more and more tonal till it ends up in B minor. So I say this in all modesty. If I had not conducted that, it would never have happened, because the producer had to listen, folks. There's no overtime. Don't even think about it.
We do that now, too.
You mean the cats weren't going to volunteer?
Yeah. We would have. We
Yeah, I'm
would
sure
have.
you would.
But
You got us excited about hearing it, maybe.
Well, let's listen to it. What do you think? All
Yeah,
right. We got
yeah.
that back there? All right. This is Moon Dreams from the Birth of the Cool. Miles Davis's No Net here on DCB.
Oh, by the way, can I just say, the piece is in D major, but the first chord that Gil does is some B flat, flatted thing. I mean, I forget now exactly what it's got an E natural in it and a B flat. I mean, this guy was, well, never mind.
He had a unique personality he brought to the music.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely,
Beautiful.
yeah.
All right.
Anyway.
Moon Dream. Oh, please, Gunther.
What?
No, go ahead.
No, I was finished. I
Oh,
just wanted to
sure.
talk about that the first chord,
All right.
which should have been D major, wasn't even that.
All right. Here's Moon Dreams, Miles Davis from the Birth of the Cool on DCB Jazz.
Incredible.
That was Moon Dreams. Miles Davis's Birth of the Cool recording, Gunther Schuller conducting and playing French horn on that. You're listening to DCB Jazz. I'm Barry Winograd, and we're being joined by the great Gunther Schuller, the wondrous Daniel Schnyder, and the always good-looking Orbert Davis. And coming up, I've known Orbert way too long to say anything else. And I'd like to tell you that the godfather of third stream, Gunther Schuller, that is the name of the concert that is occurring Friday night at 7:30 p.m., Symphony Center, 220 South Michigan Avenue. And the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is going to honor NEA Jazz Master composer Gunther Schuller, and world premiere of a new work by composer, saxophonist Daniel Schnyder. Further info, chicagojazzphilharmonic.org. And it is DCB Jazz, and Orbert, I understand you and Daniel and Leandro Lopez Verde now are going to give us a little demonstration here.
We were talking earlier about, Gunther, you mentioned that improvisation is composition.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to think about the concept as composers of creating a work in which we're meeting for the first time, never played together, and what comes out? Is it jazz or is it classical?
Yeah.
And using those elements. So to the mic we go.
Okay.
Leandro Lopez Verde at the piano, Orbert Davis and his trumpet, and soprano saxophonist Daniel Schnyder.
Fantastic.
Pianist, birthplace.
Bravo.
And Orbert Davis at the trumpet and soprano saxophonist Daniel Schnyder. It's DCB Jazz and Leandro Lopez Verde at the piano. And that was wonderful, but does it always end up being the blues?
It actually ended up being the sixth movement of Daniel's suite, I believe, right?
Wait, the fifth?
No, the fifth is
No, the
Dolphy's there. The third movement of the new suite. And so when I heard him bringing that in, it's like, okay, I can stop playing now. Let that happen. Yeah.
So how many movements is the suite?
7 movements, like the
Seven.
7 days. Yeah, 7 days of passion of Jesus Christ. No, it's a 7. 7 is a good number, you know.
How long is it?
Yeah, we'll find
Yeah,
out.
we'll find
That depends.
It depends on how long we solo.
That depends on the solos and on,
Yeah.
we didn't decide on the form.
That's a big problem in jazz, that many players play much too long.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the gripe that I have is that nowadays, far too many players go immediately in 30-second notes. And the highest notes they can play. What are they going to do after that?
Well, I can guarantee you that won't happen Friday.
Oh, no, I know. No, that's why I'm
Yeah.
mentioning it.
Yeah, but
This
that's-
was so
yeah.
beautiful.
But that's the element of bringing
Yeah.
the structure of classical music into
Yeah.
a jazz setting.
Yeah.
That there are certain things that aesthetically we can use from both genres, and we will.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah, and then always if you mix something completely out or something which is not inside a predictable frame with something which is very predictable in a way like the a blues structure,
Yeah.
it actually ends up being really interesting
Yeah.
because then people will recognize something that they know and then there's something new that they don't know or didn't expect.
Exactly.
And they have to figure it out. Was that now a mistake or was it intentional?
No mistakes in jazz. But one thing that's very interesting in this third movement, that you have our string players swinging.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly.
Well,
that.
Oh, yeah.
do you mean by that they really can?
Well, now they can. But no, it's the concept. You know, my purpose for putting together this orchestra was to get outside of the norm, to get musicians who are comfortable, or at least to make them comfortable outside of what they're usually involved in. So if the music says swing, we swing. But the way that in rehearsal last night, I even had them listen as a few of us took solos. And I said,
few what?
As a few of us improvised, I
Yeah.
made the string section just listen. And I looked around, and those who weren't tapping their feet, I said, something's wrong, because you're not feeling it. You're not
They're
internalizing
clinically
the music.
dead.
Yeah, I said you can't think about what you're going to cook for dinner tomorrow. You can't think about anything but getting inside this groove, and they did. And I think it's going to be. I think you'll be impressed with what you hear.
You know that in order to swing string instruments, the bowings have to be the reverse of what they would be in classical music. I discovered that
Exactly.
about
Yeah.
50, 60 years ago. I said, my God, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What classical musicians do with a down bow, jazz violinists and all these people that came along already in the 20s, it's an up bow.
Right, because the accent is on the upbeat, on the syncopation, so you have to reverse the thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that was great. My goodness.
American music in general, but also, obviously also jazz, that everything is upside down if you compare it to European music. You know, it goes on 2 and 4, ding, dong, 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 ding, dong, dong. It doesn't go like ta ta ra ta tum 1, 2. So it's upside, and the 8 notes too. It's not ta ta ti ta ti ta 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 ti ta ta ta. So it's very interesting, and if you can actually mix that, that's the microstructure of music that you cannot notate. That's the problem. There's no notation to actually figure that out. It's a style, and since
Well, you could notate it, but it would be so complicated that nobody could read it.
exactly, yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't
Because we used to just do transcriptions of jazz, and at first I started it when I was 17 years old. I wrote it as triplets because it sounded most like that. But then I soon found out, first of all, some didn't play. They played even eighths, and still it swung, and
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
And I figured out that some players played not 3 against triplets, but something that would be, let's say, 4 and 7, or 7 and 4, the longer note, yeah.
Sure.
And you can't write that. I mean, then nobody could play it.
Yeah.
So
But-
it's that subtle that each great jazz musician has his own rhythmic, his own way of playing eighth notes, you know.
It's like personality.
Yeah,
In a sense,
yeah,
it's-
well, of course, yeah.
But we're also performing Gunther's Concertino
Yeah.
for jazz quartet and orchestra
Yeah.
in 3 movements.
Yeah,
And it started off as a challenge, but now it's
yeah.
it's unbelievably fun.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
That was for the Modern Jazz Quartet.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, should we listen to some of that now?
Yes.
All right. Well, we have the Concertino for Jazz Quartet and Orchestra, the third movement, right?
Which is called Fast.
And it's called Fast. And who were the artists who recorded this?
Well, the recording wasn't the Modern Jazz Quartet that I have from Your Journey in Jazz. No, I think it's
Oh, well, that could be when John founded the, what was it called? Orchestra USA. Could it be that?
yes, I believe so.
That's what it was, yeah. We premiered these pieces that I wrote for the Modern Jazz Quartet and Symphony Orchestra. Many of those we recorded in Germany, in Stuttgart, at the radio station there. And but this must have been the later performance, yeah.
What's it?
All right. Well, you're listening to DCB Jazz, and that is Gunther Schuller and Orbert Davis and Daniel Schnyder, our guests here. And we're going to listen to a part of this recording of Concertina for Jazz Quartet and Orchestra, the third movement, right here at 90.9 FM. And that was part of Concertino for Jazz Quartet and Orchestra, the third movement, Gunther Schuller with Orchestra USA. Yeah.
Because it didn't sound like Percy Heath, who made the original recording. And I was no longer involved with Orchestra USA. I mean, I don't mean that negatively.
No,
I
you
just
had
was too
other
busy with
projects,
other
yes.
things. Yeah, it's pretty good. You know what's so hard about those accelerandos? To pace it from point A to point F somewhere, so that you don't get too fast, too early, or that you are too slow, you know? And this was very good, very tempered, you know, every chorus a little bit, I was saying to Orbert, almost imperceptible, but then suddenly you realize, oh my God, it is faster. That was, I guess that was one of the first times that someone had written a long accelerando for a jazz orchestra, jazz situation. Yeah.
Mingus did things, but that was...
Well, that's in a different way. He did just many different tempos, but this sort of long accelerando kind of thing was unknown. Or if you did that, you were a lousy player.
Or something was just kicking in, right? You're listening.
Full of surprises too, though.
Oh.
The fact that it accelerates, but then at the end of the acceleration comes an extended piano solo with accent. So we got to be on our toes.
Yeah.
You're listening to DCB Jazz. That's Orbert Davis. The wondrous Gunther Schuller, who composed that, is here with us, as well as Daniel Schnyder. And I'd like to remind you they're in town for a concert, the godfather of Third Stream, Gunther Schuller. Friday night, 7:30 p.m., Symphony Center, 220 South Michigan Avenue. Further info, ChicagoJazzPhilharmonic.org. And we have a little music we're going to listen to from Daniel that's been pre-recorded, not live and improvised. And this is a piece called Triplex that Orbert's brought along. Now, why did...
Surprise!
Now, Orbert, you know, Daniel's recorded thousands of songs. Why did you come up with Triplex?
Well, in listening to the concept of your composition is very classical in nature, but yet it's in a jazz context. That's what I love about it.
All right. Can you tell us something about Triplex? Do you agree?
Yeah, do you agree?
Yeah.
You don't have to be polite here.
Just keep me out of trouble.
You know, like usually if you have a jazz composition, traditional jazz composition, it's a melody, and then you improvise on the melody or on the chords that are underlying the melody. But with composition in a European style, let's say Beethoven, so what you do, you just take a small motif, and then you even cut it off into smaller motifs, and then you create new things. Like, for instance, da 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 ti da 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 ti ya, pa da da ti da 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 ti da 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 ta, pa da da ti da 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 ti ya, pa da da ti da 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 ta 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 ta. So something like that, where you have one element and then you cut off another element and you superimpose them, or you transpose them into different pitches, and you create like that. You create a composition, which means a big putting together of musical ideas. And that's also something that you can hear here in Triplex, which I mean, I don't say that I bring that to jazz music like Thelonious Monk, and then there's this, what's the Well You Needn't, and then the middle section, it's just a cut off of the first idea. So Monk is probably the jazz composer that applied that technique in jazz too. But yeah.
But isn't what you just described improvisation? Beethoven sitting at the piano, improvising his own theme and finding a new way to state
He was
it.
a great improviser. Oh, I mean, Bach too.
Well, all of them.
I don't know why today's composers are no more really improvisers. This is a whole other question. You know, why that died out. You know, that tradition of being able to improvise, being able to play too. You know, actually, as a composer, that you also that was always the idea. Orbert said, okay, listen, if you come over, then you also have to play, and I love that. It's great, you know, to be as a composer, to be inside the creative process, because then the musicians will also feel much more at home, because you're also making little mistakes, you know, and things. It's also for me. I run this thing for the first time, so it's it will be an interesting a process of rowing together. You know?
Yeah, to experience your composition
Yeah.
with this organization is part of it. Yeah.
Just an interesting footnote. Just Beethoven was a great improviser, and many others, of course. But it's ironic that then his compositions became so great and so overwhelmingly creative that improvisation went out of business. And guess who brought it back? Jazz. 100 years later, or 150. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. There was this long hiatus where there was no improvising, except organists in churches. They always improvised, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I have a question. We'll get to the music. And I've been meaning
Okay.
I've been saying this for a long time. And I'm going to ask Gunther this question. Do you think that in the history of the development of classical music, that jazz should have been that next frontier? Past atonality, maybe before, or 20th century?
Wait a minute, say that again?
Should jazz be the next wave of classical music? Instead of it being separate, should it have been part of the classical development?
Well, you're dealing with semantics here. What's
course.
classical, and I don't know, that's a slippery slope.
I know.
I don't know.
Well, we'll talk about that later in the week, and maybe on the real deal, I'll give a summary of our conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
I personally think that it was a part of the classical development. If you listen to Ravel piano concerto or something, there's a lot of jazz in that composition. And then there was World War II and Adolf Hitler and everything that came after that. And then we had this very bad the separation of. One thing is, okay, this is jazz music, blah, 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 and it was not institutionalized, and they played in little clubs, and now you did a great job by creating something like that, because that's really missing in the jazz world. You just have club owners, and you don't have organizations like the Berlin Philharmonic or the New York Philharmonic, and that makes it very hard for jazz musicians to come up with things that are a little bit larger, you know, use a lot of different instruments, a lot of different ideas and new ideas. It's very, very hard money-wise.
Exactly.
Well, why don't we listen to a little bit of Triplex? Daniel, do you remember this recording? Who was on it besides yourself?
Well, I'm thinking about it.
Well, he didn't write anything down. All he wrote was the name.
Okay, then,
it
okay,
called?
yeah, that's
Spell it.
Michael Mossman. That's
Michael Philip Mossman.
Marvin Smitty Smith, Michael Formanek, and Kenny Drew Jr. That
Formanek? Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Formanek,
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
Formanek
great.
is on it.
Yeah.
And Marvin Smitty Smith, yeah, I already said that, and Kenny Drew Jr. that unfortunately passed away last August.
Okay, let's catch a bit of this. It's DCB Jazz and Daniel Schnyder's composition Triplex. hate to fade out on Kenny Drew Jr.'s solo, but we're getting towards the end of time here. That was a song called Triplex, written by the saxophones. You heard Daniel Schnyder, and Daniel Schnyder here with us, along with Gunther Schuller, Orbert Davis, DCB Jazz, and those folks are here because there's a wonderful concert going Friday night, 7:30 p.m., Symphony Center, 220 South Michigan Avenue in Chicago. The godfather of Third Stream, Gunther Schuller with the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, and Daniel Schnyder's got a new composition, a world premiere of a new work that will be performed in 7 parts, and maybe 6.5, we'll see. But if you need further information, chicagojazzphilharmonic.org. I want to thank all 3 of you. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Now, was that vocalist I was thinking, was that Kenny Haygood?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
I was trying to remember the birth of Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, I hope everyone will have a chance to get out and hear the music. Gentlemen, we got about 30 seconds left before I have to read our out. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with? Orbert?
Just, it will be quite an experience, I promise. Yeah, and I just want to personally thank you guys for coming in to Chicago. Welcome, and let it be your home this week.
I want to end up. What? I want to end up by saying what a great thing you have created here. And of course, we have somebody named Wynton Marsalis who reigns at the city, in New York, but this is the counterpart to that, a symphony orchestra, which of course Wynton wouldn't do, and I'm not saying he had to, but this is the counterpart. And that's unique what you've done.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I'm dazzled.
And, the Dazzled Band, that's Gunther Schuller, Daniel Schnyder, Orbert Davis. Thanks for being with us here for this live broadcast from PianoForte Chicago on WDCB. PianoForte is located at 1335 South Michigan Avenue in Chicago. The PianoForte Foundation is dedicated to promoting the art of piano in Chicago. You can find more information at pianofortefoundation.org. Thanks again to Orbert Davis, Daniel Schnyder, Leandro Lopez Verde, and of course Gunther Schuller, whose works will be celebrated by the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic in a concert this Friday evening at Symphony Center. Tickets and information available at chicagojazzphilharmonic.org. The work of the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Aaron Copland Fund for Music, and New Music USA. Thanks to Victor Lejeune, Thomas Zoles, and the entire crew here at PianoForte. Thanks also to Bruce Oscar, Clarice Gavoris, and Dan Bindert at WDCB, and to everyone at Chicago Jazz Philharmonic for their assistance with this broadcast. I'm Barry Winograd. Stay tuned for Marion McPartland's Piano Jazz coming up next here on WDCB at 90.9 FM.